Gina Davis, Steve Martin, Goldie Hawn, Quentin Tarantino. What do these four have in common? Yes, they're all celebrities working in the field of film and television, but that's the easy answer. In fact, they share another, perhaps more interesting similarity, as they're all examples of a fairly rare group, celebrities who are also members of Mensa. Of course, Mensa members are rare in general, as admission into the world's oldest high IQ society requires scoring in the 98th or higher percentile in a standardized IQ test. And while anyone familiar with Steve Martin's groundbreaking comedy work or Quentin Tarantino's witty, verbose screenplays might not be surprised to hear they made the Mensa cut, there is another celebrity whose Mensa membership is often shared as a, you would probably never guess this, trivia surprise to movie fans. One of the reigning kings of direct-to-video action for the past 3 decades, Sweden's own Dolph Lundgren. Lundgren's intelligence shouldn't be a surprise, however, if one is familiar with his past. His mother was a language teacher, and his father was an engineer and an economist for the Swedish government. While Lundgren had childhood aspirations to be a drummer in a rock band, and got involved with both martial arts and weightlifting at a young age, he never neglected his studies, graduating high school with straight A's, and studying chemical engineering in America at both Washington State and Clemson University. Ultimately, after serving a mandatory 1 year in the Swedish military, he would graduate from Stockholm's Royal Institute of Technology with a degree in chemical engineering, and then move to Sydney, Australia, where he continued his martial arts training and worked as a nightclub bouncer while earning a master's degree in chemical engineering at the University of Sydney. Lundgren was then awarded a prestigious Fulbright scholarship to MIT, but while preparing to move to Boston, he was spotted at the nightclub he worked at by musician, model, and actress Grace Jones, who hired Lundgren as her bodyguard and later became his lover. Moving to New York with Jones, Lundgren quickly became enraptured by the glitzy lifestyle her world offered, including a small bit part she secured him in A View to a Kill, the Bond movie she co-starred in. Lundgren finally would make it to MIT, but would quit after only 2 weeks of study, deciding instead to pursue acting full-time. Not surprisingly, Lundgren said he found the entertainment industry more exciting and fulfilling than the world of chemical engineering. And while meeting Grace Jones and being pulled into that world might seem like the sort of don't let sex and rock and roll pull your child away from their education cautionary tale many parents fear, Lundgren's decision to choose a new career path probably seemed a lot easier to accept when he quickly earned massive success as the deadly Russian boxer Ivan Drago in 1985's Rocky IV. And even if Lundgren's subsequent career, apart from roles in the successful Universal Soldier and Expendables franchise, arguably otherwise never quite reached the heights that star-making Rocky performance might have suggested, it's still hard to dismiss the success he has enjoyed in the action genre ever since. Yes, maybe Dolph Lundgren, Doctor of Chemical Engineering, would have gone on to do great things in that field, but then we would have been deprived dozens of direct-to-video, classics like Silent Trigger, The Peacekeeper, Stormcatcher, Retrograde, Diamond Dogs, Command Performance, Skin Trade, and Kindergarten Cop 2, to name just a few. So, if nothing else, the science world's potential loss was certainly the direct-to-video market's obvious gain, even if the start of Lundgren's reign as a DTV star actually kicked off with a movie that was never meant to be direct-to-video at all. The year is 1989, and New World Pictures are looking to launch a brand new action comic book movie franchise with a violent adaptation of one of Marvel Comics' most popular and darkest heroes, with The Punisher. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Welcome once again to Failure to Franchise, the show dedicated to some Hollywood's most infamous mistakes, missteps, and misfires. This is Trev.
And I'm Chris. And typically, Trev, you know, I like to throw maybe a pun here or there at the beginning, but I couldn't think of anything. So, I'm going to contact my girlfriend and ask her for one because a pun is her speciality.
All right. I somewhat commend you for not going the easy route of making a pun and calling yourself the Punisher, which is what everybody does with this. But still, long road there to get to a little payoff.
It was funny because I was at her house today, and I was like, I can't think of a goddamn intro for this episode. And then she hit me in the arm, and she's like, think harder. And I was like, pun is her. And then we high-fived. Yeah.
I thought maybe you'd go the route of saying, like you heard of the Punisher, but man, we're having such a good time. A couple of Funishers over here or something, But hello, you still there?
No, I'm gone forever. Actually.
Well, the reason Chris and I are being so clever and witty at the beginning of this is because it is time. It's a new year, Chris. Can you believe it? We've survived.
Crazy.
I know. It might be the last year in American history, so you might not have me as a friend and a co-host very much longer. We'll see.
Yeah, are you going to become a refugee? I have space. If you want to come to Canada, I have
thank
space.
you. Yeah, I might need to. Yeah,
Okay,
I'll keep that in mind for sure.
For sure.
Although living in Canada versus just death, I don't know. All right, we'll talk about. We'll weigh these pros and cons. But no, it is a new year, and so that means it's time for us to do a new theme. We got for Fairly Franchise Presents Trev and Christmas, which I think was a rousing success. Mm-hmm. And now we're heading into a new 3-movie theme, but 3 movies that, I mean, this is probably, of all the themes we've done, probably the 3 movies that are the most thematically linked of all time, probably.
Yeah.
And that is we are heading into what we are calling our New Year's Punishment Party, where we're going to be looking at all 3 feature film adaptations of the Marvel Comics character, the Punisher. That's right, folks. They tried this 3 times, and obviously none of them took off.
And in a pretty short amount of time. Like,
Well, especially the second 2, yeah.
Yes, definitely.
But yeah, so we're kicking it off. We're going in chronological order, and we're kicking it off with the first attempt to bring the Punisher to the screen. And actually, this is going to be a very interesting one to talk about because this kind of falls into a lot of just early comic book movie, discussion too. This is definitely a different time compared to the comic book glut we get nowadays. But that is the 1989 film, The Punisher. Chris, why don't you tell the listeners about it? Because I'm guessing a lot of them don't know about this one.
That's for sure. For reasons we will get into. But this is directed by Mark Goldblatt, his only feature after Dead Heat. But he is quite a prolific editor, by the way. And you know me, I love editors. So when I found this out, very cool. He edits most of Michael Bay, James Cameron, Paul Verhoeven films. So yeah, great career on that end. This is written, Trev, by a F2F alum.
Oh, yeah.
Bose Yakin. His first feature, he went on to write Prince of Persia, The Sands of Time, which we went over a few months ago. The character, of course, is created by Jerry Conway, John Romita Sr., and Ross Andrew. The budget of the film is $9 million. Worldwide, this was a little hard to find, if I'm being honest. It says it made $30 million, but the reason why it's hard to find was that this movie, for reasons, was not released in the States, Sweden, or South Africa. It was released internationally, but not in giant markets like the States. So that's difficult to
theatrically, at least we should say. Like in the States, it does eventually hit video, but a couple years later.
Yes.
So yeah.
The only real premiere it had in the States was at like a comic convention, I think a year later, which is crazy.
Yes.
So
yeah. And it's only and then later on, years later, it was theatrical prints were shown at the Dolph Lundgren Film Festival in North Carolina or something, where Mark Goldblatt brought his own personal print, but it never received a theatrical run at the time. I think it's safe to say, based on what I've read, and Chris, I'm curious if you agree, I do think it's safe to say this movie probably did eventually turn a profit. But just obviously not a substantial one. And because of how it turned a profit, how long it took, and just all the shenanigans of what was going on behind the scenes, which we'll get into, it really ultimately didn't matter, obviously, that it turned a profit. Yeah.
Right. So we want to talk about, of course, the character, the Punisher, right off the bat.
Oh, and I guess we should say first, since we're getting into that, let us also welcome all of our new listeners, all those dipshit, right-wing militia guys and the cops who for some reason wear Punisher logos and the military. Welcome. I vehemently disagree with all of you, and I think you're fools who completely misunderstand this character. But hey, glad you're listening.
Well, they're probably not listening to this one because of the lack of logo. So
yeah, it's true.
Maybe that's an issue. Maybe we'll get them next time.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yes, the Punisher character. Usually I throw this to my co-host, who is a plethora of comic knowledge. He typically has some sort of story about why the character means so much to himself. I'm not sure about this character. I know we have talked about certain movies in the past, but Trev, the Punisher as a character, let's talk about him.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to be a cliche, but I guess I'm going to be.
Here we go.
Yep. No, this is a character that at various times has been like one of my favorites, if not my favorite. This is a character that I love. Now, this is a character that in his own comic history has a lot of ups and downs.
Right.
And there has certainly been times I've fallen out of his, caring about him, and there's been times where Marvel has stopped caring about him as much. And he's got an interesting publication history, and we're not going to talk about it all today because we got 3 movies to discuss, and each of them representing different time periods. So we'll just kind of cover the early days of the Punisher in this one. But that is to say, you might roll your eyes a little bit to hear me say again about another comic book character, like, oh yeah, no, I do love this character. But I want to make the point that doesn't make me special by any means, saying I love the Punisher, especially around this time, because the Punisher was just inescapable in the late 80s and early 90s. That was really the first just like peak of his popularity, and he was one of the biggest characters Marvel had. I mean, he was up there with Wolverine in terms of, just guest starring and everything. And at the time this movie came out, he had, I believe, 3 monthly titles running: The Punisher, I guess he only had 2 at this point, Punisher and Punisher War Journal, but then Punisher Warzone would follow shortly after. And I remember being a kid and being so excited that he was getting a 3rd title, and I couldn't wait to get like Punisher Warzone #1, and like going to like the supermarket and comic book stores like week after week being like, did Punisher Warzone #1 come out? Did Punisher Warzone #1 come out? So that's like a memory I have in my head, which reminds me of how into this character I was. And yeah, he was just, he was a byproduct. He was, we should talk about the basic history of him, and people don't know. I think there's probably some cultural osmosis where people know, oh, he's that killer vigilante guy with the skull, right? He originally created in 1974, as you mentioned, by Jerry Conway, created as a antagonist for a story in Amazing Spider-Man. He was kind of introduced as more of a villain. He was he's a vigilante, but he's tricked by the Jackal into going after Spider-Man because the Jackal convinces him that Spider-Man is a criminal, so he thinks he's going after just another criminal to kill, but ultimately realizes he's being used, and him and Spider-Man end up having like an uneasy truce at the end. And then like Marvel, I think, didn't really know what to do with this character because he was just, he's created to be so violent, and he was a clear anti-hero at best. And it wasn't really sure, is this just going to be another villain, another recurring kind of character that pops in and out? And eventually it took a writer named Stephen Grant to really kind of go to Marvel and say, I really think there's more we could be doing with this character. I really think we could really push the Punisher as like a star character of his own. Right. And eventually him and Mike Zeck were allowed to create a Punisher miniseries, which was a huge hit, and that led to the first Punisher ongoing, which I think started in, I want to say 87, I believe.
86.
86. Okay, 86. And then like Punisher War Journal is probably 87. And then, yeah, you're off to the races, where like I said, this guy's got, 2 titles going. He's just all over the place, and he's just so different, right? He's so different than the other books on the marketplace because he's just flat out murdering his bad guys. And the stories are, sometimes they're fantastical, but more often than not, they're kind of these more down and dirty, gritty crime stories. And he's, even like off of what he's created with Jerry Conway, he's very much based on the same kind of men's adventure books of like the 60s and 70s that we've talked about on here before, because like Remo Williams is in that, from that world.
Yep.
There was a time where that was the biggest thing. You'd go into the bookstores and there was all these series that were called like The Executioner and The Penetrator and Destroyer. No, I know. That's a real one, though.
No, I know.
And I think in particular, the Punisher was like almost directly based on the Executioner book series. So yeah, he's a very popular character, very different. And the last thing I'll say about that is you have to remember, and I'm sure we've talked about this before in various episodes, the other thing that obviously blows him up to the point it does is that the 80s was the time that comic books became very gritty and dark. Right. And suddenly everybody wanted the comic books to be more adult-oriented tales. And so the Punisher just fit perfectly into that. And so just a very different character. And yeah, and you can see like when you're like a kid, so I would have been like 8, 9, 10 around this time and reading comics, obviously this seemed like super badass and seemed like something I shouldn't be reading maybe, but that's what made it awesome, for the forbidden fruit of the Punisher.
Yeah, like he steps, or before he actually even gets published, they want to name him the Assassin.
Yes.
And like right away Stan Lee's like, well, I don't know about the Assassin. I don't know how marketable that is, so let's change it. But like you're saying, the difference, there was like a call by the public to have a different kind of comic book hero. I think at this point, I mean, we're in the late 70s, early 80s, all that stuff. Superman is big and bold and bright, and all these other characters are big and bold and bright. The Incredible Hulk show is going on right now. The Spider-Man 60s cartoon, had been on before. And I think here, having a character who has a monochrome costume and this big white skull just stood out, from all the bright and colorful Marvel characters. And also, again, bloodthirsty vigilante. He's a loner. He's an anti-hero. He works outside of moral codes. And I think, there's a real, and it kind of leads into the reason why this movie was made when it was, but 1989 is also a year that goes towards Tim Burton's Batman. Mm-hmm. And I think at this point in history, people wanted something a little bit, I don't know if grounded is the word, but definitely something a little bit more dark and brooding. And The Punisher fits that mold quite well.
And it was like an era where a lot of people who hadn't read comic books in years were suddenly hearing, and like the Tim Burton Batman would be a big part of this, suddenly going like, wait a minute, comic books are doing this now? Mm-hmm. They've gotten this dark, they've gotten this interesting. And then you also, with The Punisher, you did just mention the other thing that we've talked about a couple times here, but the logo, the skull logo.
Yeah.
I mean, instantly iconic. You see him and he's just a great character design right off the bat. There's no way you'll ever forget the look of him. And credit to John Romita Sr. on that regard, because when Jerry Conway first came up with the character, he intended the skull to just be like a little skull on his chest, like over his heart. And when John Romita Sr. drew the character, he's like, you know what? I'm going to blow that bad boy up. I'm going to make that son of a bitch his whole chest. And great move, because, it's one of the most iconic logos and character appearances. And as I said, we'll probably talk more about this in later episodes, but even the way that skull has been, misrepresented in pop culture and co-opted, yes, but still like an amazing logo and a big part of the character's success.
And again, the reason why the Punisher is on a vigilante mission is because the comics, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm pretty sure I'm right, but correct me if I'm wrong. He was a Vietnam vet, right?
Yes. Yep.
And basically he has a family, a kid or two, and his wife, and they get caught in the crossfires of a like a mob war in like a park, right? Like there's no hit on his family though, right?
No, in the original origin, he's come back from Vietnam. He's trying to lead a normal life, and him and his family, 2 kids and wife, they go to the park and they wander, and they are walking through the park and they wander upon a mob execution.
That's
and because they walk into it, the mob opens fire on them and ostensibly kills them all. Although Frank Castle, which is the Punisher's name, he survives his injuries, and then that sends him into an eternal one-man war against all crime to make sure nobody else has the same tragedy that he has. So basically, a very similar, it's the basic superhero origin. It is kind of the Batman origin, right? I'm going to make sure what happened to me never happens to anyone else. The only difference is he's like, by doing that, I'm going to basically shove grenades up bad guys' buttholes and just destroy them left and right until there's no living criminals on the earth. That's his ultimate goal.
Yeah, like total judge, jury, executioner. That's the Punisher, 100%.
Yep.
So, the movie, it took a while to be made. As we said, the first time the Punisher showed up was in the mid-'70s in Amazing Spider-Man number 129. And at this time in the 80s, Marvel was nowhere near what it is today. They tried out their first comic book feature with Howard the Duck, a movie that we will talk about one day, and that was a complete abysmal failure. So the second movie on the docket was this one, and the reason why they pushed this one to the forefront was because, New World's Pictures or something? They had actually bought a piece of Marvel at this point, or bought some characters.
So New World Pictures, we should talk about them a little bit because they are the production company behind this. And if you're the kind of movie fan I am, the New World Pictures means a lot to you. They were the company created by Roger Corman in 1970.
Right.
And so they were his primary, production wing throughout the 70s and 80s. And if you just go look at their filmography, and it's just like this, it's an amazing amalgamation of all these classic exploitation films. They were just killing it with movies that would obviously go on and become cult hits throughout the 70s and 80s. And during the 80s, Marvel Comics today, we think, it's this behemoth run by Disney, but Marvel Comics has had a very sketchy and up and down history itself. And there was a period for a while where it just kept getting sold and bought and moved. And at a certain point in the 80s, New World Pictures bought Marvel Comics just outright. So Roger Corman's New World Pictures just owned Marvel Comics. It was just one of their wings. And with that came Marvel Productions, which I think it was called, which was the wing that would do, movies and TV. Most of it ended up just being animated shows. Mm-hmm. But at a certain point, as we're getting close to this movie's release and the production of it, New World Pictures is starting to have some financial troubles. It will ultimately not last very much longer into the 90s. But one of the first things it does to try and save money is it sells off Marvel in 1989. It sells off Marvel Comics, but it engineers the deal in a way to where it sells off Marvel Comics, but it still keeps Marvel Productions. So it still has like the film wing of it. And yeah, you say it took a long time for this movie to be made, but yes and no. I mean, The Punisher had been around since '74, but as I said, like he didn't really blow up as a huge mainstream character, a solo character, until '86 and '87. So honestly, like they got this one going pretty quickly once that happened, and I think New World Pictures was just like, good God, we need money quick. Like, what's the Marvel character that's going to get us the most easy profit? And I think that's probably why they ran right in this one, because they probably looked at the sales at that time and said, this character just blew up. Like everyone's loving this character right now. Let's do this one. So this was almost probably, I could almost guarantee this is like a last ditch effort of a New World to say, of all the Marvel slate we have, what's one that will like definitely make us a profit right now?
Isn't that interesting of like just the difference of times,
Yeah.
like at the end of your company's like, I guess, life, you're thinking, let's make a R-rated, super violent, mean-spirited action movie, I guess, like a revenge flick. And, flash forward to 2023, 2024. I mean, if Marvel was destitute like they were back then, I mean, they would just do another X-Men movie, you know what I mean? Or do another Spider-Man. Like they would just go back to the well, so to speak, and then make it the most generic thing possible. And it's just so interesting to think of the times, the late 80s, wild times.
Well, it's important to remember too, though, that when they're looking at The Punisher and deciding to make this movie, I guarantee you a lot of the people involved were choosing willingly not to look at it as a comic book movie. Right? Because
totally. Yeah,
this
right.
was not that time, right? This is not the time of comic book films. As we said, 89 is also the year of Tim Burton's Batman, which will obviously start to change things to a certain degree. But that hadn't come out by the time while they're making this, so that was still a question mark. The more recent memory of comic book films would be Howard the Duck, or it would be seeing the Superman series sputter out. It would be the failure of Supergirl, So I think it kind of makes sense. Again, another reason Punisher would make sense for them is because what were the big hits of the 80s? It was Rambo, and Terminator. It was still R-rated action movies. That was still a big deal. And also coming out of the 70s and into the 80s, the Death Wish series, I mean, revenge vigilante movies were still a really big genre. Totally. And that's a big part of this too, because The Punisher comes out of that. The Punisher's based on that. And I'm sure this is something we've mentioned in previous episodes. I wouldn't remember where, but like just vigilante movies in general is like one of my favorite subgenres in action films. And so, it was like a big deal still in the 80s. So yeah, everything about this lined up to where it seemed like probably a safe bet for New World Pictures, because the Punisher was a character that was really popular in comics, but still new enough that they could probably trick a lot of the audience to thinking, oh no, I'm not seeing a comic book movie, right? I'm seeing a movie like Death Wish. I'm seeing a movie like Rambo. So that was probably playing into their decision here too.
Totally. And I guess that's the reason why you end up casting Dolph Lundgren. I mean, first and foremost, I guess they did offer it to Christopher Lambert.
Lambert.
I
guess they were dead set on getting an actor whose English is their second language, and would have a hard time delivering lines.
You know what's funny too? First of all, he had to drop out because of an ankle injury, by the way. But Christopher Lambert is a funny actor to me, and especially because of the next episode we'll talk about with The Punisher 2004, starring Thomas Jane. As a young whippersnapper, I used to confuse those two all the time.
Really?
They have a similar bone structure and face. If you've never noticed that, if you put Christopher Lambert's face and Thomas Jane's face, especially 80s, 90s, they look almost indistinguishable.
Well, I'm like 35 years older than you. I grew up with Christopher Lambert a little bit more. So like I'm a huge, like, with this again, that Highlander is one of my favorite movies.
Yes.
And that happened when I was very young. So by the time I kind of clocked Thomas Jane and he started to become on the scene, I was already aware of Christopher Lambert. Okay. So no, in my head, I've always had that way more common thing of confusing Thomas Jane and Aaron Eckhart.
Oh, interesting.
Not Aaron Eckhart. No, who's the one I'm thinking of? Is that? Hold on a second. Let me rethink that. Is it Eric and Ecker I'm thinking of? They get confused all the time?
I'm keeping this in.
You son of a bitch.
You looking it up?
Yeah, 1 second.
While you're at it, do Christopher Lambert and
No, I see what you, now that you say it, I see what you mean.
It's totally right. When I noticed it was especially when I watched Mortal Kombat and when he was Raiden. There's certain faces he makes, certain like eye movements, and especially when he's on the ship in the beginning, I was like, damn, is that Thomas Jane? Obviously, I didn't know who Thomas Jane was at that point, but they were one and the same person.
Oh, it was Aaron Eckhart. I guess you can. Yeah, okay. I'll just say that again then.
Or I'll just leave it in.
No, the one I would always go for was the far more common, I think, comparison of, or a confusion of Thomas Jane and Aaron Eckhart. I think I would get them confused. And then they even made a movie together, like in 1998, called Thursday. And
really, because of your age, you just had to call your nurse and was like, "What's happening on the TV?"
Yeah, I know. It was like, wait, they perfected cloning technology, I guess.
Yeah.
No, and I like to just quickly, because I know you're going to talk about a couple of other like the potential castings and everything, but like Christopher Lambert, I love him. I love Highlander. I enjoy a good cheesy Christopher Lambert movie. I can't see him as the Punisher. I think that's like bizarre casting. And in fact, of all the other, like I know there's a couple other ones we want to talk about, but of all the like the potential other castings for this, the one that I think might have been the best is one that was ultimately revealed to never be true. I assume you know what I'm talking about,
yes,
right?
Yes.
A long-standing rumor that they had been thinking of Michael Paré from our beloved Streets of Fire to play the Punisher, and that was later revealed to never have been the case. But I look back and I go, well, actually, that would have been great. Like Michael Paré cool. would have fit right into this. Yeah.
You know who would have sucked? Steven Seagal.
Yes, who wanted the role? Yeah.
He wanted the role. Yeah. There was also for the female co-lead, which we'll talk about in the movie, but the female co-lead, Nicole Kidman, was initially in talks, maybe even cast, dropped out. And I think that helped because they were filming in Australia. That must have been part of it, because I guess part of the rule of tax credits and going to film somewhere is you have to start hiring the local talent. And they film in Australia, doubling for New York City, which had its own laundry list of challenges, especially just think of it this way, as simple as it is that they drive on the wrong side of the road. And they had to import a bunch of American cars in to do the filming. So I would have never thought about it that way. And then plus, obviously, accent work. That's an issue. But, I mean, with a low-budget thing like this, like, who gives a shit, right? You know?
Now, if that's the case, though, if they had to, they're like, well, we got to cast some Australian actors. Did it ever occur to them they could have just cast Paul Hogan as the Punisher? Crocodile Dundee himself. You seen that knife he carries around?
Yeah.
No, that's a knife.
Oh, God, I hate it. The whole time, I'm like, I'm not going to say it. And you said it.
I'll say it. Yeah, don't worry. I got you covered.
Yeah. They did a bunch of rewrites, as all of these movies do that we talk about. When they're filming it, there's about 3 or 4 different work prints of the film. Mm-hmm. And there's a whole 15-minute opening bunch of scenes that are completely excised out of the film. Which kind of gives you more of an origin story of the Punisher, which we will talk about when we talk about the movie proper. But just so you know, this movie just kind of starts.
Yes.
So there's pros and cons to that, and I think we have a lot to say about that side of things for sure.
Should we quickly just mention where Dolph Lundgren was kind of in his career at this time? Since
of course. Oh, yeah, sure.
Because we talked about him before. We did 1987's Masters of the Universe. So, which was only like, that was just
back-to-back failure to franchise, eh?
Pretty well. No, he's got Red Scorpion in between.
Oh, okay.
Which is also not a huge hit, but I mean, at least it wasn't trying to launch a franchise, as far as I know. Although now that I think about it, that might not be the case. Maybe we should do Red Scorpion someday. But I mean, coming off of his star-making role in 1985's Rocky IV as Ivan Drago. And then instantly Hollywood looks at him and goes, holy shit, look at this guy. He's an Adonis, great. He's great looking, very, very smart, as we've talked about before. Martial artist. He seems to be the complete package. He's got to play He-Man. Oops. And we had that discussion. And then they try again with the Punisher. And it's kind of interesting that he even leaps into something like the Punisher following his disillusionment with He-Man. But obviously, I guess Punisher was different enough.
Yeah.
He's talked. We talked about this in the episode about how he felt very frustrated making He-Man because he felt like he was just playing an action figure and started to feel silly. So there's probably like a big thing with him where he's like, oh no, now that I know the comic book movie, then they gave him some issues. He's like, oh wait a minute, this guy just wears like leather and kills people. All right, I can wrap my head around this. Mm-hmm. But then again, this one ends up being kind of like a nightmare for his career. So a lot of bad luck for Dolph Lundgren early on. It kind of doesn't rebound and get back into like the action movie good graces until 1992 with Universal Soldier.
Right.
So like that in between Rocky 4 up to Universal Soldier is a little bit of a tough time for Dolph Lundgren. But I think, we've both said before in the previous episode that we're both fans of the guy. And it's kind of hard to deny his like innate charisma and how just magnetic and captivating he is on screen. And I would actually say, for in a certain way, even though this might sound silly, because in Masters of the Universe he's just so ripped, he's wearing a loincloth and he's got this like barbarian appearance to him, but I'd actually say the Punisher, especially what we know of Dolph Lundgren today, is actually like a better match for him and like what he brings to the screen.
Definitely. He just needed to get his English better. Like,
that's true. Yeah.
Honestly, that's a large part of it. Like me and you both say we really like Dolph, and he just kind of had to come into his own, I would say. And that happens after a few years. And like you said, Universal Soldier comes out and he's a little bit better. And he's one of those guys where he actively does get better with each movie. Yes. He progresses, like he never kind of falls back, I would say. And even like going to like Creed 2, that's maybe the one that gave him the most acclaim. He's really good at that. Hey?
Yeah, no, I think he's figured out what his limitations are. He's figured out like how to work with it, and I think Hollywood has figured that out better too. And granted, most of his career is straight to video action at a certain point, but he's kind of like one of the undisputed kings of that arena. And you can't deny the level of success he's had there. Putting out so many movies over the years. So, and this movie today that we're talking about is basically in certain markets, including America, a straight to video movie. So I guess maybe this is the start of that. Oddly enough.
Yep. So, you want to talk about it?
Let's talk about it.
If society won't punish the guilty, he will.
You see this board here? Every time he kills somebody, I put a red pin in it. So far, the only thing that I've got to show for it is these little calling cards here and a whole bunch of these.
Now let me tell you something about this Punisher. If he ever shows up within 1,000 yards of me, he'll find out what the word punished really means.
He defends the innocent. But if you're guilty, he gives no warning and shows no mercy.
What the hell is this? Trouble.
Dolph Lundgren, Louis Gossett Jr.
Mr. P, happy hunting!
The Punisher. Justice with a vengeance.
After 5 years and over 125 murdered mobsters, the Punisher's crusade against crime has forced the Yakuza to wage wars on the local mafia. In doing so, the mob's children are captured and threatened into slavery. Frank Castle has to now rescue these children, even if their parents are the people he fucking hates the most.
Wow, that was a really good French accent.
Well, I am Canadian, so there you go.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. No, it was like Jared Leto himself is here.
Yeah, well, apparently that's accepted nowadays, so whatever. Whatever, my culture.
Chris, I want to have you go first on this one and discuss your feelings, because I know this is a first time watch for you, and also because I'm gonna request that maybe you work this into your thoughts a little bit. As we alluded to here, I think your history with this character is lesser than mine, so I am curious to how much does the Punisher mean to you in any way beyond just maybe from the Netflix stuff? What is your overall awareness of the character, and then feed that into coming to this movie now as a first time watch. What did you think? What did you think of 89's The Punisher?
Well, the Punisher kind of became a character I recognized with the Spider-Man 90s cartoon. Okay. I would say that's where it originated. I worked at the movie theater when the Thomas Jane film came out, and I'll have my thoughts about that movie when we do that next time. Yep. And then, I've seen Warzone, and we'll talk about that. And then I watched Daredevil season 2. I watched the Netflix stuff, but then I didn't actually come back for The Punisher. I don't think you did either, right?
Nope, I did not. Oddly enough. Yeah.
No. And I hear it was quite good. Like I hear,
Yeah, I hear it was fine, and John Bernthal is fantastic casting for that character.
For sure.
Yeah.
So yes, my knowledge or my heart into the character is limited for sure. Like he's not like my favorite. You know, I'm not, or else I probably would have watched this earlier. You know what I mean? I do like a vigilante, but I think this movie. I think I know where this conversation is gonna go, just because I know you. But I think you're gonna like this a lot more than me. Mm-hmm. But I don't think this is like, I don't think this is a, how do I say this? I understand why this movie has a cult following. Mm-hmm. And I think I understand why Punisher heads like this interpretation of the character. So we will talk about that. But on my perspective, as let's say I walked into this in 89, not knowing about the Punisher or who he is, I don't think it's a successful film because you don't really know who Frank Castle is. I think nowadays, you know, especially because we do know these types of characters, throwing us into a maybe serialized action installment is fun and is great, and like we don't really need quote unquote origin stories anymore for a lot of characters, especially like Spider-Man and Batman and all that stuff. But with the Punisher, knowing that they took that first 15 minutes out of the movie, I think really does hurt my enjoyment of the movie. I think it's fine as like a generic revenge film. And I think there's glimpses of a good Punisher here. Like he's kind of a walking lifeless corpse for most of the film. And I know that's obviously by direction and has a distinct point of view to show you that character that way. But because you don't have that starting emotional crux of the film and the character and why he's doing what he's doing, he's hard to empathize with, and it's just less engaging. So I don't think this is a terrible movie by any means. I think it's a fine, generic action flick, but just quite forgettable. So I understand why it just didn't get a sequel or more after this. I know Mark Goldblatt was signed to a 3-picture deal, and I just, I kind of get why, other than the studio falling apart, of course, there wasn't a huge clamoring for another one by the critics. But yeah, that's, I guess, my baseline.
So maybe this will kind of surprise you then, because it sounds like you think I'm going to come in here and be like, what? No, it's an undisputed classic. It's great. But like, no, I'm pretty mixed on this as well, actually.
Okay, interesting.
Now, it's interesting to hear you say that like Punisher heads love this interpretation of the character. Maybe that's true with some of them, but I actually think this movie is still somewhat controversial even in that degree. And honestly, my memory of this movie as a young kid was obviously, first of all, not getting to see it right away because it took a while for it to come out on video.
Yeah.
But being aware that it was coming, because that's one thing, like you'll see if you watch like videos about this movie now or read articles about it, a lot of people like to say that people had no idea it even existed. That's definitely not true, because Marvel Comics were advertising the movie. Like the poster for this movie would be on the back cover of a lot of comics. Mm-hmm. So we were waiting for this movie. But I think when it came out, obviously, we'll talk about one of the main things that's missing, which bummed people out right away. But I do think in general, it felt like a little lackluster. And I think it wasn't really the Punisher movie people were expecting to see. And so I remember being very disappointed in it when I first saw it as a kid. I will say, and this is probably what you're getting to, not surprisingly, I like it more today.
Yes.
But I think I like it as very indicative of a certain kind of cheesy, cheap 80s action movie, and not as a Punisher movie.
Like right? A canon film.
Yes, yeah, it has a canon vibe to it for sure, and like its limitations make it somewhat charming in certain degrees. But I definitely agree with you about some of the problems of it. Now, this is interesting. I hadn't watched it in years. Saw it when I was a kid. It was like, whatever, you know. Maybe saw scenes on cable since then, but have not like rewatched the entire movie in decades. And sitting down to revisit it for this viewing, in my head, I was so sure that the whole beginning of this movie was showing him as a cop, working with his partner, showing him having a family life, and like getting the whole origin that now we see as missing, right? So when the movie started and he was just already the Punisher, I was like shocked. And I was like, wait a minute, this is not how I remember it. Mm-hmm. You know what happened, Chris? I was Mandela affected. I read the comic book adaptation of the movie that came out in the early 90s in 1990.
Wow.
And that has all the deleted scenes in it. So I obviously I had that as a kid. I read it, and first of all, they also gave him the skull in the comic book adaptation.
Oh, they did.
But yeah, the whole opening is in there, and so in my head, I thought it was here, and now to find out that no, that was all cut out and it's missing. Now I agree, the movie desperately needed that, but I also wonder if the reason it was cut out, or at least one of the reasons, is the other problem with the movie. You know, like I said, as great as his physicality is, as cool as he looks on screen, Dolph just ain't there yet.
No,
in the acting department. And
like he's better than he's better than Masters of the Universe.
Well, he's being asked to do less. That's part of it.
Yeah,
you know.
Well, he still only has like 10 lines of dialogue in this movie.
Yeah, and but see here it feels more by design, right? Because you said he's like a man who's like he's dead inside. And he looks great, like the physicality is great, you know, and everything. But when it comes time for him to have to emote on occasions or something, all his lines are just delivered with such a sleepy, you know, like downbeat like tone that it's
he's boring.
He's boring. Yes, that's the other way to put it. Like he looks cool, but he's boring as a hero.
Come on, God, answer me. For years I'm asking you why. Why are the innocent dead and the guilty alive? Where is justice? Where is punishment? Or have you already answered? Have you already said to the world, here is justice, here is punishment, here in me?
Yeah, and like when, you know, his makeup is, his eyes look super sunken in, right? It looks like they painted on a 5 o'clock shadow on him. And
it's weird. There's scenes where he's like riding his motorcycle through the sewers, and like the way he's lit, you're almost like, are they trying to make up for him not having the skull on his chest by just making him look like a skull? Because that's what he looks like, a zombie. Yeah, he
does, and that's fucking hard to get behind your hero when he's just this lifeless, fucking walking zombie corpse for the whole movie. And when the action kicks in, it's fine, like it's fine action, and you can tell that Mark Goldblatt is a editor. So you're never lost in the action. It's clear what's going on. But budgetary constraints, it's just a lot of clouds of smoke, of gunshots, and it's not super fun. It's just kind of happening. You know what I mean? And that's why I feel like this movie is just a generic action movie. And because he doesn't have that big skull on his chest, it hurts it even more. Because how the fuck do I know who this guy is? Like, you know, people like to bitch and moan about the early X-Men films that they didn't have their classic costumes. Fair enough. But they still had uniforms. You know, they still had the X logo somewhere. They still had a leather jumpsuit. There was still something there that made them distinct. But me, when I'm watching this boring, you know, murderer walk around, I'm not compelled, like, whatsoever. So it doesn't stick in your memory.
Well, now to be fair, he does have the skull on his knives.
Oh yeah, okay. So stupid.
What a great trade-off, right?
Yeah, it's very strange because, like you said, he looks like the Punisher minus distinct visuals. And I just don't understand the reasoning. I know Mark Goldblatt has said that, damn, we really should have. But again, shoulda, woulda, coulda. You know, hindsight is always 20/20. But, like, why? How hard is it to just paint it on there? I watched a review even when there's scenes with him with a lot of dust on his shirt. And the reviewer said, why not make the dust kind of like position it and kind of visually, like, you know, scrape some off so it kind of looks like a skull, you know? Like, it just makes no sense why they completely excise that part of the most iconic thing about the character. They're like, you know what? Nah. Hey, we're making a Superman movie? Take his cape away.
Don't give Warner Brothers any ideas. Yeah, it's bizarre, and like what we just said about him being kind of boring and like looking like a zombie, it would work better if we had that opening 15 minutes. And we first got to see the alive version of Frank Castle.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
The family man. Because then everything that followed, he would become a tragic character. And obviously, on a level, he still is a tragic character. We're told what happened, and we're shown a really brief flashback of it, but that's not enough for us to get on his side. If we could spend some time with him, see the happy version of Frank Castle, and then the rest of the movie we're watching this like walking corpse who's like had everything we saw taken away from him, I think we'd be more sympathetic towards his plight, and we'd be more forgiving of the kind of boring characterization. But throwing us right into him already there, I think it could work, but you'd need an actor with more charisma and more command of the English language at this point in their career than what Dolph Lundgren had to offer at this point. He was still learning to be a leading man, and he was still learning the language, and both of those hurt him here. I mean, there are moments where they try to give the Punisher like funny lines, and Dolph Lundgren delivers it so like kind of hurriedly that it doesn't really work. I'm thinking of there's a scene where him and his sidekick Shakes. Ooh, don't worry, we'll talk about Shakes. But him and Shakes have a bad guy like tied up to a stretching like rack that they had just been captured in, and like they free themselves and they put the bad guy in it, and like the Punisher goes like, I don't want to make this stretch out for time or whatever, so I just do it. And it's like he says it so fast, you're like, what, was that supposed to be funny? Was that a joke? It's just like he just kind of like mumbles it, and it's like, oh well, maybe that would have been clever with an actor who knows how to deliver that, but he doesn't.
No, and I think when it's most evident, not even just his bad humor, but what's most evident that he is not good in this role. He has a partner, we're told, played by Louis Gossett Jr.
The great Louis Gossett Jr.
Yeah.
Too good for this movie. Yes.
Way too good for this movie because, again, we're told that they were ex-partners. This is where they changed the Vietnam stuff, by the way. He's just, apparently, Frank Castle is just a really good detective that takes down the mob. And then the mob blows up his car, but his family's in there instead of him. And then he disappears, and then everybody thinks he's dead, and then he's become the Punisher for the last 5 years. Anyways, in the movie, Louis Gossett Jr.'s character, Jake Berkowitz, is looking for Frank Castle, looking for the Punisher. He doesn't exactly believe that he's dead, but he's trying to connect the dots. He's trying to take down the Punisher. And they end up finding Frank as the Punisher midway through the movie. And Jake has this to yell at him about in a prison cell.
If you're guilty, you're dead.
Courts decide who's guilty, not cops. I hereby swear to uphold the law. Remember? I've been looking for you for 5 years, man. Why the hell didn't you come to me for help?
I didn't need your help.
You're sick, you know that, don't you? And what the fuck do you call 125 murders in 5 years, huh?
Work in progress.
This is no fucking joke here. They are going to electrocute you. And there's nothing I can do anything about. But you gotta talk to me, man. Let me in! Let me in! My fucking family too, right? They were my family too. Now let me in, goddamn. Let me in!
Now, you watch that, listeners, or you hear it, sorry. Dolph is out of his league. It is, you can actually see Louis Gossett Jr. fighting so hard to get anything out of Dolph Lundgren. It's less so a two actors acting. It's more like, dude, give me fucking something here, please. I'm doing all the heavy lifting.
Like the work in progress line there, like that's a good line. But I only know it's a good line by like context clues. You know, I understand conceptually it's a good line, but it's not delivered with the right oomph to make you go like, fuck yeah, like that's the stand up and cheer part, you know, like it's just, he doesn't have it. And yeah, he's definitely getting blown away by Gossett Jr.
And again, it's all tell and no show, right? I'm supposed to believe that they are partners. I don't believe that. And wouldn't that be interesting if we saw them as partners taking down the mob in that first 15 minutes? Because, you know, this, of course, was supposed to make sequels. And Jake Berkowitz is still a character at the end. And he knows who the Punisher is. Isn't that more exciting to then watch subsequent sequels when maybe this friendship dynamic is this cat and mouse, this push and pull? Do I take down my friend? Do I help him along? But we just don't get any sense of their backstory. And it is, I'm telling you, Trev, the first 15 minutes being excised out of this movie is the problem. Like, more so than anything else.
It's a baffling decision, and this is one where you're almost like, because I've seen like I haven't gone back and like watched all the deleted scenes, but I've seen clips of them in some things, and they look like they're like in decent enough shape that I'm surprised nobody has like tried to petition to just put this work print out on Blu-ray or something,
right?
And like kind of restore this movie, because I do think that opening 15 minutes would help a lot, because that's a big part of it. Because also we should say too, conceptually, this is like a strange story to have as your first Punisher movie, but not the worst idea in the world. But the execution is strange, which is ironic for the Punisher. But the idea that the ultimate plot of this movie is the Punisher has to team up with a gangster. So the story here is that we catch in like the Punisher is already like many years into his mission. I think it's 5 years when the movie starts. He's already taken out most of the mob. And like the one main mob boss he's been waiting to get finally comes back from being abroad. He's been abroad this whole time for the past 5 years. And at the same time, this mobster ends up like getting involved with the Yakuza. The Yakuza have come to town. And by the way, I'm pretty sure if memory serves me correctly, this is the movie where I learned what the Yakuza are. I think this is when I was a kid. I was like, the Yakuza. Oh, they even say like it's Japanese mafia. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. I didn't know that at the time. But yeah, so they come over, and the villain, Lady
Tanaka.
They come over, and Lady Tanaka, the leader of the Yakuza, she wants to like make a deal with the mafia and say like, well, we'll help you take care of the Punisher, and we'll run all the operations here, but we're going to take like 75% of the profits, and you only get 25%. And the mob, like led by the Franco family, they don't like this. They say no, and the Yakuza responds by kidnapping all the children of all the mob leaders. And so this is like what creates the moral conundrum of the movie, because the Punisher at this point is kind of just happy to let the Yakuza and Mafia go to war. He even just tells his sidekick, like, this is great. They'll just wipe each other out. I'm trying to be as like dead. Hold on. I probably gave that too much emotion. Let me try again. They're going to wipe themselves out. It's kind of something like that, Yeah. But the guy's like, well, yeah, but you can't let their kids be victims. These kids are innocent. They have nothing to do with it. So the Punisher vows to save these kids, but they end up keeping one of them, which is the son of the main mob boss, who is like behind the entire, he's the leader of the gang that took out the Punisher's family. But that mob boss comes to the Punisher, says, we have to work together. You at least work with me long enough to get my son back. My son's innocent. Pretty cool idea, right? Mm-hmm. The problem is, at that point, there's about 10 minutes left in the movie. And you only get him and that mob boss working together for roughly 10 minutes at the end. And it's like, oh man, that should have been like the whole second half of the movie. It should have been this thing where like him and this mob boss work together, and they start to find like this kind of commonality between the two of them, right? And it becomes like very complicated, and they're seeing like what drives the other. And so it makes it even more, because it's still going to lead to the Punisher having to kill him, but it make it more like compelling for us, and make it more even where we're like, oh, maybe I don't want the Punisher to kill this guy. Like you could make this like a real kind of interesting character study, and the movie's like, no, let's just stick that all in the last 5 minutes of the movie, whatever.
It's not even that they lack a character study. Frank doesn't even say, hey, Gianni, you killed my family.
Yeah.
Like, he doesn't even mention it. It's so strange that it's almost like they forgot.
While Danny kind of forgot about the Iron Fleet and Euron's forces, they certainly haven't forgotten about her.
Like they forgot that this is the guy that killed his family, because he doesn't mention it at all. Like, yes, I guess Frank gives a little bit, I guess the Punisher, whatever. The Frank Castle gives a little bit of a, I don't want to save them. But he doesn't give up too much of a fight. He still does it. And I also think the kid thing is just cheap. I think it's a cheap way to get me on board back with my hero. It's just like, oh, you have to go save that van of puppies. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, okay, well, duh. It's not super compelling until, like you said, they have to go find that one specific kid. So I think that's what I liked about the most. But like you said, last 5 minutes of the movie, kills the bad guy, kills him, done.
Yep.
And it's like a hard out.
Yeah. Well, I do like, if we're going to talk about the things we like in the movie, I do like the final scene. I do like the moment where the kid is like, I'm going to kill you, and he gives the kid the gun and is basically telling the kid to do it. And it's almost like he really does want the kid to do it. He wants to be put out of his misery.
I'm going to kill you.
Good. Maybe if you get it over with now, you won't grow up to be like him.
And then the moment where he says to the kid, like, grow up to be a good man. If not, I'll be waiting for you. Like, I like that stuff. And I think
That's
it's
great.
like, yeah, Dolph Lundgren actually is like kind of capable in that scene on like compared to others. But
You're a good boy, Tommy. Grow up to be a good man. Because if not, I'll be waiting.
But again, I would have cared more about that scene if I had felt the death of that kid's dad more, and he'd been more of a character throughout the movie, or at least more like in stuff with more scenes with Frank to connect those two. Yeah.
So remember when I said the Punish heads, like this movie? I did. In my research, there was just so many cultists for this thing.
Yeah.
And it almost on the level of Masters of the Universe, which is a movie we also were kind of baffled by how many cultists were there. This one, at least I can sort of understand a little bit, right?
Well, like I said, I think there's something to be said for this movie as just a fun, cheap 80s action movie, which is how I got into it.
Well, I feel very positive about it. I'm gratified that it found an audience. It was, at the time, in many markets, it didn't play in the cinema. In the United States, it was sold off to a direct-to-video company. So there was no theatrical run. That was heartbreaking to me and to people who worked on the film. But I had to accept it. There was very little vindication for it. So to have people caring about it at this stage, and I know a lot of DVD companies have come out with Blu-ray editions, internationally.
Yes.
Director's commentary track is on there. I mean, there's a fan base for the movie, which is gratifying.
Well, Garth Ennis, who kind of revitalized the Punisher character.
Talk a lot
in the
about
90s.
him next time, yeah.
Yeah, but he actually had this to say about the 89 version. It's the most honest attempt to capture the Punisher because, as there is in all of the others, there is no pulling back. There's no compromise. There's no attempt to sweeten him a little bit and take him away from what he so obviously is. In that movie, every time Frank pulls a gun, he doesn't put it away until a dozen people are dead. He never doubts. Now, do you agree with that?
I mean, yeah. Again, conceptually, that's actually true. Like that, everything he says is true, but like that doesn't mean the movie's interesting.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that you still need to have a compelling actor and a compelling story that makes that mean something. Like otherwise, you are just watching a vigilante kill people, or in some cases, shoot slot machines for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I mean, I like I said, I definitely do. I mean, you're right that I like this more than you. I'm very aware of the problems, but I also see like probably a lot of people saw this when they were young, and it's just like it slotted right into that. Like it's got the same kind of vibes. I'm not saying it's as good as something like Cobra or even some of the cheesier Death Wish sequels, but it fits into that slot of, it's all practical. It's actual squibs.
Yeah.
There's some cool violent deaths. The hero is just this kind of like unstoppable monster. People like that too.
There's a hot ninja chick.
Yes, two hot villains, and one like with the sidekick being just like particularly like the hot white the white ninja, of course.
Well, it appeals to that little adolescent boy mind for sure.
Yes, yeah, that's what I mean. Like this movie actually feels, if today you release this movie, and exactly as it is, it would play like a great satirical parody of 80s action movies, right? So it fits into that where it's like, it's got like all the cliches of that world. Like the bad guys, you were doing your cheesy Italian accent. These I believe many of these are actual Italian actors, maybe, but I don't know. Like they're sure Italianing it up, and like the
hold on. Gianni Franco is the character. He was played by Jeroen Krabbe.
Well, I was talking about his lieutenants. Believe me, I know who Yaron Krabi is because
Brian Rooney, Larry McCormick, Todd Boyce, Lonnie John Tupu. You know what? They're not Italian.
Okay, well then that explains a lot. No, I know Yoram Krabi, who plays Gianni Franco, is he's the bad guy in The Living Daylights, another James Bond connection.
Right.
And hey, Dolph Lundgren is in A View to a Kill as a bad guy. So look at this.
Also not Italian.
And we just no, definitely not. But yeah, and then like I think like Lady Tanaka is a cool villain. You know, like again, I'm just not that there's much to her, but just in like the female Yakuza boss, like that was a cool villain in like the early 90s or late 80s. So yeah, it's just all plays into the most obvious cliches of this time. But if you just turn your head off or your brain off in a certain way and go,
decapitate yourself.
If you just turn your head around and don't watch the screen, this movie's not that bad. If you just turn your brain off and say, okay, don't forget about Punisher. Don't ask this to be a Punisher movie. Just have it be Murder Man or something. Then it's like, yeah, fine. Like you said, it's got those canon vibes, and like it's also only like 80 some minutes.
Oh yeah.
So it's not the worst to watch in the world. I don't think anybody would like regret watching this. But my problems are more that I do think it's a failure as a Punisher movie, because I think by taking that origin out and having him not be as compelling as we want him to be, that's what hurts the movie. I think it's like a fine 80s vigilante movie and a not great Punisher movie.
Before you talk about Shake, I gotta bring up what the hell was going on with all the close-up cuts to violence that were shot on like the worst film stock and dirtiest lenses possible. What was that about?
Did you wonder if those were like reshoots or something, or like
they seem too specific to be reshoots? It looks like it's actually like they either zoomed into the film stock later on and dirtied it up on purpose, maybe a stylistic choice. I have no idea.
Or they asked like the second unit to take care of all that, and the second unit was working with like different tech.
Totally. Or that. Yeah. And you know what? It's probably that. It's not a stylistic choice. There's no way. It is so distracting and ugly and terrible. And it rips you out of the violence every single time. It's just so obvious. I hate it. Okay, Shake. Talk about him. Your favorite character. In Marvel Cinematic Universe history.
And if we're going to talk about things that are great, let's talk about Shake, right? Because Chris, I don't know if you picked up on this. It's short for Shakespeare. Do you get it?
Right.
Yes.
Right.
For some reason, this movie, this is another thing. Okay, when I was younger, when you're young and you're excited that a movie's coming out about like a character you've been reading in the comics and you love it, it's the province of the young to be particularly like confused and upset when they change anything, right? So as a 10-year-old, you're really like, what? He's not wearing the skull? Ridiculous. And I remember also being like 10 and being like, where's Microchip? Microchip is his sidekick in the comics. So like for a long time in the comics, this has not been the case in years because of the whole storyline. Maybe we'll talk about it in one of the later episodes. But especially at this point, in the late 80s, everyone who would read The Punisher knows that his main sidekick was this man named Microchip, who was essentially his Q. He was like his tech guy. He would supply him with his all his weapons, all his his vehicles, and that was the secondary character in the comic book. I'm guessing maybe because Goldblatt wanted this to be a more down and gritty movie, that he didn't see a need for like a tech guy, because he just was like, well, he doesn't need tech, he just needs machine guns, But he still needs a sidekick because you need him to talk to someone during the movie. Either you need to be someone has to bounce dialogue off of. So instead they gave him Shake, which is this like drunken ex-actor who that's like silly on the surface. But the fact that he talks entirely in rhyme is what was driving me nuts. Because it's like, it sounds like everything, like, it doesn't sound like he's improvising his dialogue. Everything sounds so written ahead of the time that it just kills like the believability of the character. I do like the moment when we're introduced to him and he was supposed to meet the Punisher 4 hours ago and he like missed the meeting. And the way the Punisher lures him into the alley is by driving a bottle of bourbon like up to him in a remote control truck and then driving it away. Like that's a good little moment. But overall, Shake is like a pretty big miss in this because he's not the character you want to see if you're a Punisher fan. And then even if you like don't know the Punisher and don't know much about Microchip, as I'm guessing is the case with you, I'm guessing Shake was still like, who's this fucking rhyming asshole? Like, what is this deal? Like,
he was just annoying. He's just like an annoying drunk. And because he's a drunk too, you're kind of questioning why Frank Castle like even trusts him to do his bidding and to like find information and kind of be his assistant. Like why would you have an alcoholic do that?
Well, there's the moment where they're punishing Frank.
When they're punishing somebody.
There's the moment where they're torturing Frank on the stretch rack, like I talked about. And then he's like not giving up what they're looking for. He's not giving any answers. Mm-hmm. And they're like, well, okay, like if you don't like being tortured, maybe it's worse when those who care about are being tortured. And then they like pull a blanket off and reveal that Shake is in the other torture rack. And honestly, I didn't know in that moment, like, would the Punisher care? I don't know.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
You can't read it on Dolph Lundgren's face because, as you said, he doesn't know how to emote, or he's being told not to emote. So it's like really hard to get any sense of like, would he be fine with this guy being tortured? Does he consider him a friend? That's like never made clear in the movie either. So it's just like why I get why, like I said, he's just there so the Punisher has someone to talk to and someone to convince him to go save the kids at a certain point. But the movie didn't need a sidekick and didn't need one this annoying.
Another character that is a baffling inclusion and also baffling absence from the rest of the movie. Remember, listeners, I said Nicole Kidman was almost cast? Well, we have another actress, Nancy Everhard, who plays Sam Leary. She kind of follows around Detective Jake Berkowitz for a while, just kind of getting plot out. Like, she's kind of like the girl to get plot out of Jake to talk about his relationship with Frank Castle and the Punisher. And did you notice that she just disappears from the movie entirely after the Punisher, like, knocks her out?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, we got the two evil women for the Punisher to fight. We don't need another broad running around, you know?
I know. That's too much woman beating, I guess, you know?
I would say that actually seemed like surprisingly, is it weird to call like a man fighting a woman progressive? But the fight scene between
Jonathan Major's lawyers just was like, oh no, we could have said that in court.
No, I guess the point I want to make more is, and again, like, I guess because I'm comparing this to some of the modern action stars we've talked about who can barely allow themselves to let other super giant men be shown beating them in a fight.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But when we get to that fight between the Punisher and like Tanaka's daughter, the hot ninja, kudos to Dolph Lundgren for allowing himself to, like, on screen just get beat up by this woman who's like not even as big as him, but like obviously has the martial arts skills. That's actually a pretty, like, that's one of like the good action scenes in the movie, I think, is that fight. Agree. And it was like cool to just see him be like, yeah, you know, they're beat me up, you know. So I was turning a little more Sly Stallone there, but
you were.
Yeah.
Do you think he allowed it because there may have been hanky-panky?
He found it erotic. Yeah, probably.
Yeah, exactly. She's quite attractive.
Yes.
Yeah, this movie is, like, I think if you add that first 15 minutes in, okay? I know I keep saying that. So if I'm annoying listeners, well, sorry, like, whatever. There's worse. I can be worse if you want. But the first 15 minutes, if you put that back in, regardless of Dolph's I guess skills, it's a better movie. Even if he's bad in those first 15 minutes, I need to see his relationship. I need to see the dichotomy of where he was versus where he is now. And I need to find a reason to root for this guy. You can't just tell me that his family exploded in a car. Yes, that sucks. And I that would destroy anybody. But is it a reason to go kill over 130 people? I'm not sure. You know what I mean? Like, I think I need to see it. I need to see relationships. I need to see the emotion. I need to be connected to this character on that level. And because that's gone, this movie is a failure for a reason. And it's completely forgettable. Like, I would never watch this again. Like, I know you have the DVD. You surprised me. Well, didn't really surprise me, but you have the DVD. And so you've only seen this a couple times then? Like twice?
Well, now, to be fair, the reason I have the DVD, Chris, that's a pretty recent purchase for me.
Oh, okay.
I was at a used DVD store, and it was one of those stores where it's like they sell all the DVDs, like buy 3, get 10 free, you know? And this happened to be there, and you never see this DVD out in the wild. And I knew we were doing this theme in a few months, so I was like, oh, well, yeah, I guess I should have it, you know. So, now that said, will I ever watch it again? Yeah, maybe. Like, again,
it's my favorite. Like, of course you will.
Look, but the thing is, you know me, like, you know that I have, like, shitty movie nights or, like, you know, like bad action movie nights. And this is the kind of movie that, like, kind of works for that because it's definitely a movie you can have and put on and talk during. You know, you don't have to pay close attention to it. This is like a good kind of party movie where everyone can just kind of wake up when some of the action scenes start. And then even there, you have a range of like good action scenes and then also action that's like so poorly shot and choreographed that it becomes kind of funny. So, you know, you kind of get it all in this movie. Like I said, it's short and it is just an interesting piece of the character history. But as I said, anything that I like about it, I like more as like it being so representative of a particular kind of action movie we don't get anymore.
Yeah.
And everything I don't like about it is its failings as a Punisher movie. So ultimately, I'm not like we don't do this enough on the show. Sometimes we forget to talk about if we think there should have been sequels or not. Right. This one, no, I'm fine. You know, I don't. Oddly enough, do you agree though that like I would like to see Dolph Lundgren play the Punisher now, like an old version of Frank Castle, like. Now, it was said he's gotten better over the years. For him to come back to it, it seems like it would be perfect. But he was not ready for it at this point. He couldn't carry this movie. He couldn't carry what the movie was asking him to do. And he was also just getting his feet shot out from under him by the script or by whatever, I guess in the editing, like the whole backstory get taken out. Mm-hmm. So a lot of things going wrong here. And you end up with a movie that's fun on a certain level, but ultimately pretty disappointing.
Well, I guess in 2019, he did reprise the role in a photo shoot. So.
Oh yeah. Okay. Well, good enough. Yeah.
Good enough. It's funny you say that DVD is hard to come by now. I used to work at Best Buy. It was like my first job when I was like 14, and I stocked many DVDs of this movie, and it's because I like the poster's actually awesome. The poster's great. If you throw a skull logo on his chest, it'd be even better. But he looks cool. He looks badass. His motorcycle's in there. But the poster's pretty great. So. Too bad.
How has nobody? Maybe I mean, why has nobody just gone in and used like AI or like whatever and like CGI'd a skull on him throughout this entire movie?
I think it's because people forget this movie exists.
Oh yeah, that's
like
probably right.
Yeah, like I'm serious. Like I know I said a lot of Punish heads like this movie or whatever, but it's still like so forgettable. It's not a Supergirl. You know, like
no, it doesn't. Like, it's not even a Masters of the Universe, right? It doesn't have like it didn't hold on in that way either.
When Marvel eventually does their Avengers: Secret Wars, I'm not expecting to see a Dolph Lundgren cameo like I expected to see a Supergirl cameo in The Flash. You know what I mean? Like this just doesn't have the iconography.
You know what it is, Chris, and this is something like even beyond what we think about the movie. This proves something we often talk about when we talk about streaming movies today, in like how important a theatrical release and run is. In making sure a movie holds on in just the public consciousness.
Totally.
Like in its biggest markets, you know, it's the biggest market in the US, this was a straight to video release that came out 2 years after the movie was meant to. So it's like it's thought of as like one of those DTV action movies, if anything. If it had at least come out in theaters and still been a bomb, it would still be remembered because you would have had those like months of like posters in the theaters and TV spots and, you know, the trailer running with Batman maybe or something, you know, and we didn't get that. So all we got was a bunch of posters in Marvel Comics and going, where's that movie? And then having to wait for the VHS to come out and then renting the VHS, going home, watching it and going, what the fuck? He doesn't even have the skull. What is this? You know? So like, yeah, it makes complete sense to me that it's forgotten.
Yep.
I do wonder if I don't even have to wonder this that much. Like, you know, my fiance watched this, knows nothing really about the character. She quite enjoyed it. And so it'd be interesting to just show this to more people who like don't really know the Punisher. And like I said, maybe it like plays better for them. But when you go in knowing what you want to see from the character and kind of not getting that in a lot of ways, it really hurts it.
Well, and that's why I keep saying it's a technically well-made generic action revenge movie.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you are into the skeleton of those types of movies, you'll find this fine. You know, like you'll walk away.
Except the skull's not there. See what I did there?
Nice. That was good. Okay. Oh, okay. That was really good. That was good. So yeah, no, I agree. I think if you just came into this completely blank slated, it's totally serviceable. You know. But yeah, no, to answer your question before, even about wanting sequels, yeah, I'm right there with you, obviously. Just don't need them. Just don't need them. There's 500 more generic revenge films I can watch on this caliber.
There are also just like plenty of vigilante movies that are like, that would just work as Punisher movies. you know?
Yeah.
Like,
right.
it's not the same time period, but like I used to always say that Man on Fire, the Denzel Washington movie, is actually the best Punisher movie ever made.
Yep.
You know, if you just make a good movie about somebody who gets wronged and then just takes out like a gang, you're making a Punisher movie essentially. And there are certainly a lot of better ones than this.
Well, Hollywood didn't stop here though, and moving on.
Stopped for a while though, to be fair.
It stopped for 15 years. You're right, actually.
Yeah.
It did stop for a while. Because, as we'll talk about next episode, the comic book movie landscape changed quite a bit. So, next episode in our New Year's punishment party is, well, The Punisher from 2004, starring Thomas Jane. And I'm looking forward to that one. Been a while.
Mm-hmm. Did you see that in the theater?
I did see it in the theater, and that's when I worked at the theater myself. So,
cool.
Excited to talk about that and maybe reminisce a little bit for sure.
Yeah. Yep.
So, cool. Follow along at F2F Pod. That's at F2, the number 2F Pod on all the socials. Like us there, like us everywhere. Rate, review, whatever you do. Star rating would be great. And just join the tribe and hit that subscribe and keep on with us through this New Year's punishment party.
All right, I'm going to try to say goodbye in my best Dolph Lundgren as the Punisher. You ready?
Sure.
All right, we'll see you next time. Was that too good, or was I bringing too much emotion even still?
That was pretty damn good, okay? You know, from a New Yorker like me, I gotta say that was pretty good. Pretty good, you know?
All right. Get you a pizza pie.
Oh my god, alright. We're insane. Gotta go. Get a pizza pie. That's great.